Hello, everybody. We're all back in the room, which is great. Lunch was fantastic. Glad to hear all the chat around the room. I think a huge part of the value of these conferences are the incidental conversations we have over morning tea, lunch and other breaks, and so great to hear so many fantastic conversations that are happening around the room and also downstairs. So that's been awesome. We've had a great start to the day. Fantastic couple of sessions. I think Stephen was amazing. We're now into our third session for the day, where the focus will be on horticultural workplace relations, labour retention and attraction, and current challenges facing growers. Naomi Wilson is the founder of Focus HR, a people and leadership expert and a guest speaker who works with businesses to help build winning teams and thriving businesses by getting their people, strategy and leadership right. Naomi was also a finalist in the Australian CEO of the Year Awards, and her business, Focus HR, has won multiple local and national business awards. Please join with me in welcoming Naomi to the stage.
All right, wonderful. Thanks for having me, and thanks for this event. I have thoroughly enjoyed this morning. It's been amazing. So really appreciate being able to be a part of it. So yeah, I'm Naomi Wilson. I've got Focus HR, started about 11 years ago, and we do work in the people leadership and strategy space. I'm a huge believer in the power of people. I'm also a massive believer that if we can get our leadership and our people practices right, then compliance becomes a small piece. And that's kind of the angle I'm taking with you today, which is a little bit different, but hopefully you'll get to see what I mean with it. All right, very briefly, we've had some really knowledgeable people speaking to us today, and we're going to have even more knowledgeable people speaking to us. So I'm not actually going to dive into the legislative side of things. In our business, we have to know it. Compliance is a part of what we do, but it is one side of it. The reason I've put this up here is to lend some perspective as to why this stuff is so challenging. We've got small business owners going, how am I meant to keep my head around this stuff? How am I supposed to keep up to date? This is just the IR side of it. We've got a Fair Work Act. In fact, there's not one act, there's 6 acts and there's 6 amendments. Then we've got the regulations that go with it. We've got modern awards, over 120 of them. And I know that there's only a small number that apply in this room, but still, there's a lot. We've got enterprise agreements for some people. Some of them are getting old, some of them are getting refreshed. Underneath that again, we've got contracts of employment that some of you might have in place. And underneath that again, we've got policies and procedures. This is just the IR/HR space. We've also got work health and safety legislation, which changes from state to state. You've got your food safety requirements. You've got your Pacific Labour Scheme. You guys are faced with so many different bits of legislation and guidelines that you need to work within. And we do need to work with it. Compliance is an absolute baseline for what we do. And like we heard this morning, the rogue ones, the ones who don't do it well, they're creating all the issues for the ones who do. I'm going to presume that if you're in the room today, you're not one of those. I'm going to presume that if you're here and you're with Fair Farms, that actually you are one of the growers or one of the bodies that wants to do the right thing. And so my message today is for those people, and I genuinely believe that is the majority. Our company does a lot of the HRIR support line phone calls on behalf of GrowCom, and I know from those phone calls that we are dealing with genuinely good business people who just want to do the right thing. They also want to run a good business that is sustainable and that supports their families and the families of the people who work with them. That's the basis we come from. We've just got to try to navigate the rest of it from there. So my challenge is that compliance needs to be that baseline, but actually our power, and I use power in a certain way, our power as employers comes from a different place. It doesn't come from compliance. Our power comes from relationships. And let me explain where we come from with this. So we've come up with this thing called the convergence model, which basically talks about how employers and how employees relate to each other. If we don't take responsibility as business owners and as managers and leaders in our companies, this is what can happen. We don't give clear direction. We don't think we can get compliance right. We have that everything relies on me, the buck stops with me, the weight sits on my shoulders. We don't think about forming relationships with our people. And what that does to the employees is it doesn't give them the opportunity to work really effectively with us. They've got no clear guidance. They don't know how to genuinely contribute. They don't feel part of a bigger picture. They're unclear on their expectations. We breed that entitlement mentality, or the what's in it for me, or is my employer doing the right thing by me, and they question everything. That's what happens when we don't accept that we can actually take a different stance on this stuff. This is the opposite side to it. And I'm running through this really quickly because I'm conscious that, we've got a lot to get through today with speakers, so please bear with me. There is a longer explanation to it. But the way that we see the actual relationship between employer and employee is we're wanting that space in between us to pull closer together. We want to find a bigger common ground. Compliance is one piece of it. We've got it sitting down here. Get the fundamentals right, get your compliance right. But we need to do all the other stuff if we want to be really powerful as employers. We need to set really great strategy and purpose and values, and we need to get people who want to live with those. We need to provide really great leadership. And I know that Grow Common Fair Farms have just rolled out a program around that. Don't tell other HR people, but I have a genuine belief that if we can breed and grow really great leaders in our teams, we can make HR redundant 90% of the time, because they'll deal with the people stuff really well and it won't get to the tricky stuff. We focus on relationships as business owners. We're pulling people in on that relationship. What this does, if we do this stuff effectively and we've got a really nice, strong common ground between employer and employee, is that we actually end up playing in that space where we want the same thing. We want the same outcomes. We're winning together. We're working together. Compliance, again, table stakes. They're the thing we've got to get done, but wow, our power rests in doing all the other stuff really, really well. I recognise this can be really challenging in a transient workforce, when you've got seasonal workers, I get that. But if we do know that we've got regular employees throughout those seasons, or if we know that it's our leading hands or our supervisors who are the ones who form a core of our workforce, we should be doing this with them, because they will naturally spread that to the people who work with them, for them. They will instill that in the people who come and work for them. So just know this is the basis that we come from when we talk about really good people practices. Compliance is a table stake. We've got to get it right. So on the leadership front, I've been doing this people thing for longer than I care to. 20 plus years is how long I've been in the HR game. I haven't always been a manager of people. It's only been recently with my own team that I've technically had people report to me. But I have been dealing with people, and they are unpredictable and irrational and emotional. They are all of those things. They are also wonderful. And so some of my mantras or some of my learnings come from that experience, and it comes from talking with other business owners and managers and leaders about the challenges that they are facing. So I want to share a couple of those with you, because this really sits in the space of pulling our people and our leaders together so that we have that really great common ground. The other bit about that common ground in the middle that is really good is if you've got a strong relationship, if you've got a genuine, trusting, caring relationship with your people, you've got a bit of room to make mistakes. Because we do, right? We try to do the right thing all the time. There are times when our words will be clumsy. There will be times when we have missed 14.3 AI of the award. When we've got a really good common ground with our people, us doing that small mistake doesn't break the relationship. They instead trust that actually we're just going to do the right thing and we're going to fix whatever it is that's been done. So we want that big space. This is my first mantra. People are the most powerful, inimitable part of your business. Inimitable is a really clumsy word to use, but I love it, and it speaks exactly to what I want to say about it. You can copy most things about a business. You can copy the software they use, the machines that they use, the procedures that they have. You can get their hands on their training manual. You can copy so many different things about what a business does. What you can't copy is the people. There's no printer for that. And so my learning along the way is it's the people and the culture that we create with those people that is the inimitable, cannot be imitated, part of doing business. So focusing on your people and focusing on getting that people and culture part of it right, that creates a really powerful differentiator for you as an employer, which naturally flows onto competitive advantage in the marketplace. My next mantra is stolen from Maya Angelou, but this is one of my favourite sayings of all times. People will forget what you said, they will forget what you did, but they will never forget how you made them feel. I don't know about you, but this is 100% true for me. I live in Toowoomba, still a relatively small, city, so to speak. You know lots of people. You probably went to university with half the people that, you walk down the street and see nowadays. I will walk down the street, I'll see someone that I knew 20 years ago. I won't remember even exactly where it was from or what I did with them, but I will know instinctively whether it was a good or a bad. I will know the feeling that I've been left with from that person. Our people, our employees, have exactly the same thing with their leaders and managers. When we're in that management position, there's no throwaway comments. There's no things that are taken lightly by our people. Everything carries more weight. And I know that sounds really dreary and puts a whole lot of emphasis on you, but it is absolutely true. Our people listen more to what our managers and our leaders say. And so as managers and leaders, we need to have that consciousness around what I'm doing, how does that leave them feeling? And so we talk a lot about our intent when we're dealing with anything, and that can be dealing with recruitment through to hiring process, through to the induction, through to the training, through to sometimes needing performance manage. Whatever that is your intent right? And are you doing it in such a way that you are leaving them with a positive feeling about what's just happened? And believe me, you can handle performance management in such a way that leaves a positive feeling when it's done with the right intent. It is 100% possible to do that. Keep in mind too, I've got a belief that most people want to do the right thing, employees as well. I've talked about the employers doing the right thing. 99% of people show up to work, want to do a good job. They're not there thinking they want to be a poor employee or, geez, I hope I get performance managed today, that would be so much fun. That's not what they're doing. They are coming to work wanting to do good things. We just need to help them to do it. And we need to do that by setting some really great expectations and giving them the training they need to do it. And when we have to, helping them to step back into line and doing that in the right way so that all the time they've got that sense of motivation and sense of, you want to do the right thing by me. I've had this belief for a really long time, and my saying's on the left. I talk about breaking bread together. And about 2 weeks ago, I was on the Great Western Road Trip, which is a fundraising for a local charity in our area. And we went to the R.M. Williams Museum at Chapinga or somewhere. No, it was somewhere really obscure where you wouldn't expect to see a R.M. Williams. Sorry? It could be. It was near. We did go through Eidsvold, so yeah. And I found this saying on the wall, and I took a photo of it because I went, how cool, I've just found something in common with R.M. Williams. And I had nothing in common with the man before that. But if you're good enough to work for me, you're good enough to eat at my table. I really like that sentiment. So for me, it's about working with people who I would enjoy to break bread with, is the way that I put it. And that is about, I want people in my team, I want to work with people who I would happily sit down and share a meal with, share a beer with, have a chat with. It's as simple as that. And I know that as your workforces grow bigger, and again, when you've got a transient workforce, that becomes a bit more challenging. But one of the things I will put to you, particularly when you've got multicultural teams, Food is an amazing equaliser, and it is an amazing thing to join people together. It's probably one of the most common languages universally is food. And so when we have that approach of, actually, if you're in my team, I'm happy to sit with you. I'm happy to have a beer. I'm happy to, have lunch with you or have a barbecue with you. What that says to your people is I'm letting you into my space. I'm trusting you in my space. And the thing is, when you trust people to come into your space, you're also being vulnerable. I get that. I've been hurt by people who I have allowed into that space. I'm going to keep doing it because I believe that if we work with people who we genuinely want to have a connection with, we end up with far more powerful teams. And we end up with people who, like I said, big common ground, we're winning together. So I really love that I saw this of R.M. Williams, and I'm willing to bet that this mentality was a little bit outside the box in his era and in his sort of station in life, let's call it. But that is one of my mantras. The last one I want to share with you is grit matters. And I loved Stephen's story, and I feel like grit was a key part of it in terms of that don't give up, just keep going. Our industry has faced a whole lot of stuff that has required us to have a ton of grit. So for me, grit is about when it gets tough, you still keep going. And actually, grit is internal. And I want to share a story with you. It is nowhere near the Stephen Bradbury story, but I do want to share this with you. So a few weeks ago, I was over in the US and I'd been invited over there to speak at a conference, and I kind of went, you know what, if I'm going all the way over there, I'm going to have a bit of a holiday at the same time. And so I flew over, and my first week was a 5-day tour around the national parks. We did Grand Canyon and Bryce Valley and Monument Valley and all these amazing places. Stop number 1 was Zion National Park, which is just stunning. 3 weeks ago was kind of height of, well, still just stinking hot, let's put it that way. They were about 40-degree days over there. It was ridiculous. I live in Queensland, it is hot, but this was ridiculous. I had allowed myself the excuse of a long-standing hockey injury on my knee to not do anything beforehand. Like I'd stopped walking, I'd stopped running, I'd stopped doing anything. And so I was probably in the worst shape I've been in quite some time. But I've always been able to trust myself that I can do anything I want to do. I've known that I've got this grit kind of thing to be able to just push through whatever physical or mental barrier I might have. Hit Zion National Park day 1. And they said, look, all of the nice easy walks and the short walks, they're all closed. They were searching for a body from a lady that had been washed away in a flood. They'd had landslides, and somewhere along the way something else had happened. And so the only one that was left was this 6.5 kilometre walk. 6.5k, not much. Like, that's easy enough. And so I went, no worries, off I go. Anyway, I didn't realise it was 6.5k steep, about 35-degree gradient. It was ridiculous. I got to about that point there, that first arrow, and by then I was suffering. I was tired. It was hot, like I said, 40-degree heat, and it was the middle of the day, and that entire rock face was just in the sun. There was no shade whatsoever. And I was doing these ridiculously short, I swear it felt like I went from one end of the stage to the other and then had to stop and breathe. I felt like I was getting nowhere. I had my heart rate monitor on, which was telling me I was sitting at about 173. I told myself that heart attacks happen at about 161. No idea whether that's true or not. Someone has since told me how to work that out, but I was like, yep, no, I'm definitely in heart attack territory. Anyway, my monkey brain started up. And it started to, for the first time in my life, genuinely convince myself that I can't do this. And I sat there and I looked at all these other people heading up the hill, and I looked at all these people coming back down the hill. And normally my competitive spirit will help me to, kind of get off my ass and keep going. But I'm watching people come down the hill who I could tell were older than me, who I thought looked unfitter than me. And normally that'll get me up and going, but all I did was sat there and went, you are so useless. How can you not do this? This is pathetic, Naomi. And I really started to sort of beat myself up for it. And then I started to think, that's it. You're that person. you're middle-aged, you're out of shape, you've reached your prime, you're on your way downhill. I was so there. And I was just kind of sitting there, just totally and utterly beating myself up. I then started to think about other people who I would normally, keep in mind, this is also the first time in about 20 years that I've done anything significant on my own. I've been married, I have a business partner, I have children, I have great friends. Everything, every major moment, every major thing I've done in my life, I've done with someone there. Someone to support me, to tell me it's okay, to tell me I'm doing the right thing, to cheer me on. This was the first time in 20 years I didn't have that. So I started to think, I just really need someone here with me, you know? I need that person to tell me that I can keep going. And then I got really pissed off at myself. And at that point in time, I gave myself a really hard mental slap, and that was what I needed, because I went, hang on a second, you've never been the person that needs someone else to tell you it's okay, or that you can do it. You've always been the one to tell yourself that. And so I got up, and I went around the next corner, which was the corner I had convinced myself I couldn't do, and it was the most amazing sight you've ever seen. It was shade. And I got, it's beautiful. And so I got to walk through this beautiful, shady valley for a little bit. And then it went cray-cray again. It was like 45-degree angle, I'm sure, heading up. It was a ridiculously hard climb. But my mindset had changed. Anger had switched on. I told myself I was an idiot for being, so soft and just keep going. Now, I tell you this story because of that. Grit matters. That was where I had to get to, by the way, that point up there. It was actually a really long way still to go. And I kept asking people as well, I'm like, is there far to go? Thinking, surely someone will be nice and say, no, you're nearly there. And they're all going, yeah, it's a really long way to go still. Not helping. Anyway, I did eventually get there. It felt amazing. And the other thing that reinforced for me is nothing worth getting is ever easy, or rarely. Steve Bradbury, 13 years of training, nowhere near that scale. But it was still that overcoming sensation. Personal grit matters, and it can only come from within you. And you've had to face so many things. We have had fires and floods and COVID, and we've had a crazy 3 years, right? And it has relied on all of our grit, all of our resilience to pull us through that. And your people rely on that as well. So I'd encourage everyone, as part of their, leadership journey, part of their leadership mantra, is find what gives you that grit, be able to pull on it when you need it, and also be really kind to yourself. Because if you let your monkey brain take over too much, like I was doing, that's what's going to hold you back. Instead of actually saying to yourself, it's all right, you've been here before, you've gotten over it before, and you'll do it again. It's all right to sit in a wallowing space for a little while, but pull yourself back out of it, use that grit. So that's my final mantra. I hope I have stuck within 20 minutes. I have a really bad habit of talking a lot. But yeah, they are my mantras. They are my small little bits for you to take away. But if there is one key message that I'd really love you to get, is that be compliant 100%. Use these great organisations like Fair Farms and GrowCom to do that, and then take it to the next level with your own approaches to how you are as an employer. Thank you.
Thank you, Naomi, for those insights and sharing some of those people management tips with us. It's fantastic. Now, I'm personally really looking forward to our next speaker, Catherine Belisha, not just because I've heard that she's a force of nature, but also because Catherine is a grower. Also, for the same reason, looking forward to Amman a little bit further in the program. And I suppose the reason why that is, I think it's really important today and all the time that we keep hearing the grower voice. And I suppose on that front, it's an appropriate time to recognise the contributions to Fair Farms by the grower board. A few of them are here today. Michael Kent just here. We have Judy Shepherd. We have Belinda, now friends, and Sharon Windolf. So it's fantastic to have them in the room with us today. I guess it's important to reaffirm that Fair Farms is a program that's been designed by the industry, by growers, for us. And Catherine with us, and looking forward to your contribution. Thanks, Catherine.
Good afternoon, everyone. Not an Olympic medalist, but I am a grower, so I think we're nearly as important, if not more so. So we'll start with, if I can work this clicker. How do we do this? There we go. So I want you to imagine we are starting a new world. And on this world, I introduce you to this person. This person is responsible for creating and harvesting the one primary product we need as a human race to eat. They are also responsible to nurture, lead, and employ some of the most vulnerable and highly exploited people in this world. They are also the stewards of the land. What would you call them in this new world? You'd call them a hero. Would you call them a hero? You know what you call them in this world? A farmer. And very rarely are we called heroes in the media or in any other place. So that's what we do every day. So I want you to hold on to this image as I keep talking about my personal journey and the industry as a whole. But how jarring is that we are genuinely seen quite often as some of the baddies in the world. Our products are constantly being argued that they're not affordable or they're not reachable. Yet, in a new world, we would be called heroes. So this is my family. So usually this will work a bit better in Victoria because we're a lot more multicultural down there in horticulture world than we are here in Queensland. But my family is a migrant story. My family is a migrant story like many horticulture family stories are. So my baba came from Albania with his two brothers, and they set up in Werribee South in the 1930s. The reason they started growing vegetables because World War II broke out and the Puckapunyal Army base and the soldiers there needed fresh produce. So that's why that area flipped. That area grows broccoli, collies and iceberg lettuce majority to this day. And the reason for that was because Italian migration was the main, and we just copied as Albanians. We didn't have anything original to grow, so we just followed the flow. So Werribee South is still a tiny little pocket, and it produces 80% of all cauliflowers grown in Victoria. 80% of all cauliflowers bought in Victoria come from Werribee South, 60% of broccoli, and about 30% of iceberg lettuce. So this tiny pocket is still a migration story. So my grandfather had a wife sent over to him. Yes, it's as bad as it sounds, but in that time, not as bad as it sounds. And they had some kids, him and his brothers. So one of them being Dad in the middle, that's Valley there. So all the cousins worked together on the farm. And as the saying goes, as they got older, too many chefs spoiled the broth, so they all went their separate ways. And Valley Valicia, my dad ran a business, which I joined when I was 19. Now, I didn't join it through any aspiration that I'd be standing here preaching how farmers are heroes, not at all. I ended up in the business because I wasn't doing much at uni, and Dad said, like a good European, if you're not going to study, then you're going to work. So off I went to work. I stayed in the horticulture industry I stayed in that business for 20 years, till to this day. But I probably had no reverence for it until the last 5 or 6 years from when I took over the business. So I worked in the business. I've worked in all aspects. I started packing boxes at the start when Aldi supermarkets came here 20 years ago. So that was my job. I packed about 3 boxes, put them in the car, drove them down to the warehouse. We now do probably 5 trailers a day. So our business has grown with their business. But throughout this, I worked in the wholesale markets. I got up at night and isolated myself from the rest of the world selling vegetables. I've worked with the supermarkets, against the supermarkets. I've done it all. And I guess there was a stage where I really resented our industry. It's a hard industry and we're not revered. I went to university then when I was 28 and I did a social science degree, youth work degree. Absolutely nothing to do with horticulture or agriculture. But that ability to now have freedom of choice in my career and also a new lens of self-actualisation, I saw what opportunities this industry has. The only industry, might I say, that really we need as humans to survive. Water, air and fresh produce. Dairy and meat will probably argue with me, but honestly, we are the only product that humans need. Yet we get such little assistance, such little support really, other than our own body. And that's why something like Fair Farms had been created by us, for us. And the only solutions that are ever going to come in this industry are from us. So the winds of change. I bought the business off my dad about 5 years ago, and I took over a business that probably wasn't that compliant in a lot of areas. And that is no different to a lot of our other businesses. And I think what is also forgotten, that migration story is very important when it comes to our businesses, because we haven't had the exposure to other corporations, we've just worked and we're just doing the best with what we've got. So I took over the business, I knew things had to change, not only from an ethical point of view myself, but also from the expectations of what our community wanted, what people wanted from us, and also what our major customers, the 3 chains, expect from us. So expectations changed. Then there were standards. So now we have to apply to standards. Now usually in the past, us growers have been really resistant, another audit, another standard to live up to. But I think standards can be really used for our benefit, and that's where Fair Farms is different. I wholeheartedly believe that it is an asset to our businesses that lead us to become better, more efficient, safer businesses. And by us doing that in our businesses, on a micro sense, we change a whole industry. So by embracing this and changing our businesses, we become leaders of a whole, because that shifts a different conversation. And our biggest problem, as we're all here, attaining and retaining a workforce. So how do we do that? Well, there's lots of different ways, but I just want to touch on nuanced about this. This is, I think, what our biggest problem that will be coming for all employers in the future. So this is not about workers and retaining and attaining stuff, but this silent threat of mental health is going to be something that will be playing out throughout our businesses. And it's not a silent threat because all we do is talk about it and all you do is hear about it in the media. But the silent threat is, how do we actually action and support our businesses for this not to become such a costly factor, not only for ourselves as growers, 60% higher suicide rate for farmers than any other people in any other industry. Now that's probably for all the reasons I've said. Average days off for someone who has a mental health claim, 303 days, opposed to a physical injury which is less than 100. So you do the maths. And almost 50% of all employees leave their work. So this is my future projection of what also Fair Farms, ourselves as growers, will need to focus on and protect and support as we move forward. So, that's enough of the gloom. How do we fix today's problems, tomorrow's problems? Well, I have all the answers here today. No, I don't at all. I think we've got a real problem. We've got worker shortages now, but I don't see really what we're doing to fix this problem for the future either. And I think the problem is we need a rebrand as our industry. So if we go back to that first slide, imagine if we were telling young people that growers were the heroes of this world, which you've all agreed we are, instead of farmers. So how do we lead next generation? First, I think we need to have diversity in our leadership, reflective leadership of our workforces. Now, you can answer that question yourself. Do your businesses reflect your majority workforce? Mine does, but that's something that I think people need to look at. And also now, what are we telling the next generation, the future farmers, the future people who are going to come and work in our industry? horticulture links to everything, every subject there is at high schools and primary schools. We are all the careers that you could ever want, and we are the one thing that humans need to survive. Are we telling this story? Fair Farms helps us make sure that our businesses are safe moving forward, that we can happily go forward and preach this to the next generation. So yeah, we have a worker shortage issue now, a very real one. But what are we doing for tomorrow's worker shortage? And I think spruiking, talking about how we can educate tomorrow's generation about all of the opportunities, about the hero sitting there on my left and the hero sitting there on my back, about how we're growing and feeding the only food that needs to be, that we are the primary industry that Australia can build its back on, not to mention the only food, honestly, that will save the planet. Where are these conversations coming from us? Fair Farms allows us also then to go forward with this conversation knowing that each of our businesses are ethically employing people. And this is why it's this collaborative approach that's so important. But there's no point in doing things in this room and then keeping it silent, because all of the problems that we still face will be there tomorrow unless we are telling people our story and reclaiming our narrative. We need to celebrate who we are and what we do. And I don't think we ever do that. I don't think we truly ever celebrate ourselves. And I think that needs to happen in a really more realistic way, not in the poor farmer way, which we still do ourselves. And we need to communicate this message externally. And I think Fair Farms, again, plays a really important part in this, because what it does is to make sure that we are all at a standard, that we can feel confident about reaching out and telling our stories, about the career opportunities, tomorrow's heroes and today's heroes. So if you'd like to learn anything more about what we do with Veg Education school programs, or what I think about the face of the future is, please reach out. I'm really privileged to be here today to speak, and like I said, when I stayed in horticulture, I never thought that these are the conversations I'd be having, so I'm very grateful for the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. That was the speech I think we all needed. So thanks for that. And also thank you for the obvious leadership that you are providing our industry. I think it's fantastic what you're doing, so congratulations. Our next speaker is Ben Rogers. Ben is the NFF's General Manager for Workplace Relations and Legal Affairs. He joined the NFF team in June 2017, bringing his experience in workplace relations and law to the role. Ben comes with a wealth of experience in the industrial relations and workplace relations area as Principal Solicitor in the ACT Government, and previously with Comcare and private legal practices in New South Wales. Please join with me in welcoming Ben to the stage.
That's a terrible photo. Thanks, Rich. Thanks, Rich. As Richard indicated, I'm the General Manager for Workplace Relations and Legal Affairs at the National Farmers Federation. Hopefully you're already familiar with the NFF, but for the uninitiated, we are the peak farming body representing the agricultural sector across Australia. We were formed in 1979 as a federation of farming advocacy bodies and have since been at the centre of many nation-shaping debates around labour, trade, environmental policy, tax and so forth. We like to think of ourselves as one of Australia's most trusted advocacy groups. Today, Today we have over 30 members representing most of the farming and the farming sectors and commodities in Australia, and that includes the National Farmers Federation Horticulture Council, which has membership with GrowCom, AusVeg, AusBerries, and represents pretty much all of the fruit and veg growers in Australia. In addition to having responsibility for legal matters at the NFF, my focus is on workforce and employment. That includes industrial relations, farm safety, access to labour, and skills and training. I have a background in employment law, but most of my focus is on immigration and access to labour. I was asked at the conference today not just to signal the NFF's enthusiasm for Fair Farms, but to talk about the future of workplace relations under the Albanese government. Needless to say, that's a busy space at present and has been since the election in May. Labor won government with a worker-forward platform. They took roughly 18 IR and employment promises to the election, signalling a lot of changes coming to this space. I'm going to touch on just 3 of them to give you a sense of where we're headed and what industrial advocacy will need to look like in the coming years. The first area I'll talk about is insecure work. Albanese has said that he wants to discourage arrangements which don't offer a guarantee of ongoing employment, as they deny income security, undermine the workers' bargaining power and contribute to slow wage growth. The Prime Minister has stated that he'll make job security an express objective of the Fair Work Act. That won't create any additional rights or duties, but it will mean that the interpretation of the Act has to promote job security. So what it could mean, for example, is that when a Commission's considering a variation to an award or introducing an enterprise agreement, they'll have to consider whether or not that promotes job security. Other changes the government is considering is enabling the Fair Work Commission to make orders with respect to the transport industry and gig work. But what I think will be the most significant change is the redefinition of casual employment. This is actually just the latest development in a saga that's been ongoing since 2018. To put it briefly, there are 2 competing definitions of casual employment. The first focuses on the actual working circumstances, that is the hours which the worker does and the frequency or the length of employment. If the employer works regular hours over a long period of time, then they're not going to be casual under this definition, despite what they or their employer might think. That definition is the preference of the unions and has found some favour with the Federal Court, but there are problems for business with that approach. The legal classification of an employment relationship can change over time without notice, and that could mean that the employee is accruing leave and has access to unfair dismissal rights while still being paid the casual loading. The alternative definition focuses on the employment contract and the offer which was made and accepted by the employee. That definition is favoured by businesses, was enshrined in the Fair Work Act by the Coalition Government and was effectively adopted by the High Court. It reflects the current state of the law, but the Prime Minister has indicated that there's going to be change. We don't know exactly what that change might be, but we are concerned about a definition which focuses on working circumstances rather than the contract. The approach introduces uncertainty and arbitrariness. In a worst-case scenario, it allows the employee to double dip. A definition which focuses on the employment contract is clear, fair, and provides certainty. It follows that this is a debate we'll be engaging in. An area which we hope to see positive change is to the way enterprise bargaining is handled. Hopefully you all know that an enterprise agreement or an EA is an arrangement which supplants the award to some extent. In principle, entering an EA is relatively simple. It's an agreement between the employer and the employee which is ratified by the Fair Work Commission. But in practice, getting an EA is a technical process which is complicated with strict timeframes and criteria. Industry groups have long complained about the complexity, being a disincentive to bargaining. And if you have a look at this graph, you can see that usage increased dramatically in 2006, which coincided with the introduction of work choices, peaked in 2010 as Julia Gillard's Fair Work reforms were coming into effect, but fell rapidly thereafter and basically dropped off a cliff in 2014. Usage fell by 75% in 2014 alone. My read of that data is that far from driving uptake, the Gillard changes were a disincentive, and that's a real shame, because although EAs won't work for every business, they may be a great alternative for businesses with unusual needs or that require flexibility, which a blunt instrument like an award can't offer. That's why, at least in principle, we would like to see changes to streamline agreement making. Some change should be simple enough. For example, the Commission's role in the process at present is too hands-off. It largely just approves or rejects proposed EAs after the parties, after the parties have reached a deal. It should be more available to facilitate and assist the parties with the process. A more radical change, which has been mentioned, would be with fixing the Better Off Overall test, or the BOOT. As you're probably aware, the BOOT is one of the key tests with which the Commission applies when ratifying an EA. It's meant to ensure that the workers generally enjoy better terms and conditions under the EA than the award. However, in practice, it's very inflexible and needs to be simplified. For example, the Commission has to confirm that every single employee will be better off under the EA than they would be under the award. This leads them to take into account unlikely hypothetical scenarios when making their assessments. The Commission also doesn't give enough weight, in our views, to qualitative and contingent entitlements like redundancy arrangements, flexibility in working hours and workplaces, additional forms of remuneration and leave entitlements. Too often those benefits are given short shrift when compared to quantitative entitlements like pay rates. In principle, we'd see these as welcome changes, but the reality is we won't know until we see the detail. Another area that has seen a lot of discussion is in relation to multi-employer bargaining. The ACTU has called for collective bargaining, which is in effect bargaining across an entire industry. The Minister has made it clear that he sees merit in multiple businesses gathering collectively to negotiate with their employees. And while it should be noted that there's already some capacity for this to occur, some employer groups say that they'd like to see it enhanced, provided always that businesses can opt out. The risk is that this may just be a push by unions to increase the power and effect of industrial action. The issue is whether the system could allow unions to force businesses to the bargaining table irrespective of their wishes, thus creating scope for industry-wide strikes. It seems to me that it's unlikely the government would take this approach without the support of business, but we're watching this space because it's a cause for real concern. We also expect Labor to increase compliance and enforcement action where there are breaches of workplace law. Although this can sound alarming to some businesses in principle, we think in practice, if it's done right, there'll be more good than bad. One proposal we cautiously support is the criminalisation of wage theft. That is, rather than just paying a fine and back pay, the guilty employer will have a disclosable criminal conviction and will be subject to sanctions such as much greater pecuniary penalties and potentially even jail time. The big issue for us is how will wage theft be defined? What is wage theft? Will it be limited to knowing, intentional and systematic underpayments, i.e. theft in the true sense? I would say that sort of conduct is unacceptable and we'd be sympathetic to laws which criminalise it. On the other hand, if theft extends to minor and inadvertent underpayments, we would oppose it. Without endorsing miscalculations, we recognise that people make errors, and that's especially true when you're dealing with a complex system, and IR is probably the epitome of complex systems. So again, we're engaging with the government to make sure they understand our position and get it right. Another policy which we cautiously support is national labour hire regulation. However, we don't yet know what it will look like in practice and need to see the detail. The government may decide to develop a harmonised scheme, which was the plan of the coalition government. That is, each state has its own labour hire legislation, but each of those laws is identical. In principle, that sounds relatively simple, but we know that the territories and the states don't always play nice together. And it would require all jurisdictions to agree and work together, which just isn't particularly realistic in my view. The alternative would be a scheme established by federal law and run by a Commonwealth agency. Again, that's fine, provided the agency is properly funded. And it also begs the question, what happens to the existing laws in the states and territories which already have labour hire licensing? In addition, the government may or may not decide to follow the recommendations of the Migrant Worker Task Force. That is, to adopt labour hire regulation only in high-risk sectors, which would include horticulture, and whether they'll adopt a registration scheme or a licensing scheme. The former just requires the provider to sign up, whereas the latter requires the provider to go through a fairly intensive vetting process. So our job is not just to make sure that they develop a system which works, but it's also our job to make sure that they develop it sooner rather than later, because I think realistically we're not going to see something for many months, if not years. At present, none of these changes have much shape. Depending on how they're introduced, they could be quite good, fine, or very bad. It's our role to push for the good and mitigate the bad. However, we need to be involved in the discussion to make it happen. And I think the early signals are that despite their natural allegiances, Labor wants us at the table. The Jobs and Skills Summit is an early example of this in practice. It was undoubtedly a talk fest, and I don't think it would be unduly cynical to say that some of the outcomes were preordained. Nonetheless, there was good business participation with roughly 1/3 of the attendees notionally representing employers, including the NFF. After the summit, the Treasurer published a list of outcomes, a number of which were solid and welcome and are already part of our policy agenda. For example, enabling micro-credentials in the VET space, or the vocational education and training space, speeding up visa processing times, and revisiting labour market testing. We'll need to see how these are put into action, but it's the NFF's job to be in the room to make sure the results are to our benefit, not to our detriment. The NFF was also fundamental in the creation of the Agricultural Workforce Working Group, which was established by the side of the summit through direct engagement with the Minister and the unions. The group will have an independent facilitator and consist of representatives from business, unions and the government, including the Minister himself. The initial focus will be on areas where we share common goals and all want change. So, for example, skills, training and career development. We're all interested in designing an agricultural apprenticeship program, better labour migration, including bolstering the PALM scheme, and improved accommodation supply for workers in regional areas. The first meeting will be in October, and it will convene every month for at least a year. It may be yet another GabFest, but we're approaching it in good faith. We intend to see it as an opportunity to find common ground and a way forward. It's healthy to be cynical about all this, but we're keeping an open mind. At least for the time being, we want to engage. That is, cooperate as best we can, compromise when it's in industry's interests, but also let them know where the limits are in the strongest possible terms. The point that I'm trying to make is this: be alert, but not alarmed. Change is coming. Some of it will be big, some of it will be small, some will be good, some will be bad. If we're engaged, then we can influence policy in a way which benefits business, because if we're not engaged, we risk being steamrolled. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Ben, for that really valuable insight and the overview into our evolving industrial relations landscape. It's always good to be across those things. Next, Aman Lil is coming to the stage. He's the Managing Director of the Lil Family Trust. The Lil family has been growing blueberries in this region since 1996. In 2016, they decided to diversify into raspberries and currently have 4.5 hectares under raspberry production. A Fair Farms certified member, Aman will be speaking about his Fair Farms journey as a berry grower. Welcome, Aman.
Thank you. So for those of you who don't know me and looking around the room, there's a lot of new faces around here. I haven't seen around COFS before. So welcome to COFS, first of all. So my name's Aman, basically a migrant family as well. So my family migrated to Australia in 1985, a lot later than you guys did. I was about 5 months old at the time, so I don't really remember the journey. But basically, here's my family here. It's a bit of an old photo, so I'm missing my youngest in this photo. But Dad and Mum came over with me, my brother, in about 1985. And they actually did the seasonal fruit picking journey. So they used to work at what's today's Costa down here in Corindi Beach. Back then it used to be called Blueberry Farms of Australia, and went through a whole bunch of name changes ever since until it came to Costa. They used to pick blueberries, and then seasonally they used to also travel down to Griffith and Mildura and pick grapes and citrus and that sort of thing. In about 1990, Mum and Dad bought their first property, the farm that we still operate on till today, and they did what everybody else was doing in Coffs Harbour at the time, which was bananas. That's why we have a big banana, even though we don't have so many bananas left around these days. Once upon a time, all the houses you see out west of Coffs Harbour, that was all bananas. Everywhere you looked was bananas. So that was about 1990. Dad used to love trying different things, so he went into nectarines and peaches for a while as well. Blueberries around 1996. Since then, we've also bought a established macadamia farm in around 2012, which is a bit different to the other crops we grow there. You can probably say, well, that's a bit different. One of the reasons we bought the macadamia farm was actually in terms of managing our labour. So at the time, we only had blueberries. In blueberries, obviously, you need a lot of labour in season, within summer months. In the winter, we're finding that we will have struggling to actually give our permanent guys something to do. And if you laid them off, well, then next season they've found a job somewhere else and you've now got to train new people. So the macadamias actually gave us that opposite season in the winter, and it was something to just give our guys something to do and hold on to our staff, because, as mentioned before, staff is your biggest asset. Okay. Raspberries, a more recent thing, around 2016, and blackberries around 2020. So I actually went away to university. I got a teaching degree, applied science and education. I was teaching year 11 and 12 physics, chem, maths, that sort of thing. At the same time, I was doing the farm part-time and part-time teaching. When we bought the macadamia farm, another 2 years after that, I think I did both, and was burning myself out because if I wasn't there, I was there. It was just too much to do. So I made the decision in 2012 to come back full-time to the farm, and to be honest, I don't regret it. I enjoy what we do. There's a lot of challenges which I'm going to go through in my slide, but I quite enjoy what we do, and I think there's a positive future for us to be had yet. Just going through some of the crops. Macadamias, they're pretty different to everything else. Mostly mechanised. We've got about 22 hectares. It's all machine harvest. Basically, one guy can look after the whole property, and maybe a second guy just helping him out during harvest season. So labour requirements there aren't huge. What's really stand out for me growing the other crops, our compliance in macadamias at the moment consists of a self-questionnaire once a year that we mail off to where we send our macas to. There's no external audits at all. So contrast that with the rest of the crops we grow, and we're probably sitting there going, what? Blueberries, mostly grown under netting. We put netting over them, obviously. You've seen the netting around. That's to keep the birds out, because birds love blueberries just like we love blueberries. So much so that the first year we planted blueberries, obviously you start off, you don't have the money. We didn't have the money to put up the net the first year. Thought we'd get away with like scare guns and that sort of thing. I think the birds took about 80% of the crop that first year. I was like, well, okay, net, you've got to have net. Highly intensive labour requirements, especially compared to the macadamias. There's especially the picking. As mentioned earlier, at least the packing is now starting to become a bit more mechanised. There is a requirement for a large casual labour force at a very short notice. So that's the most challenging thing about these sort of crops. You can go from needing 10 people this week, and then you get a couple of days of warm weather, and now you need 40 people next week. And it's really hard to predict when that's going to hit. So this is where getting your labour and labour hire contractors were mentioned before. This is why the industry relies so much on labour hire contractors, because they can get you the labour when you need it. In the blueberry space, we're currently transitioning to newer genetics. We've got a lot of older plantings on our farm because we've been around for so long, since 1996. And we're basically moving into the newer genetics because they do have benefits in terms of lower harvest cost, etc., which is really important at the moment. The margins on blueberries are getting quite slim, and it's becoming harder and harder to actually turn a profit. Hydroponics in polytunnels is the future, in my belief. Blackberries. All of our blackberries are grown hydroponically. They're under polytunnels, hand-picked and hand-packed. They're just too fragile to transport to a packing facility, so we pack them on farm and ship them out fully packed. Raspberries are very similar to blackberries, all hydroponics. They're under polytunnels. I'd say these are even more labour-intensive than blackberries in a way, just slightly. Hand-picked, hand-packed in much the same way. The biggest thing about blackberries and raspberries, it's not just picking when we need so much labour. There's all through the year, whether it's planting, whether you're selecting your canes, whether you're removing suckers under the pots, you're trellising the plants and holding them up. There's just something to do non-stop all the time. So you really do rely on a lot of labour to get these crops to where they are. So why FairFarms? To be honest, because our customers asked us to do it. If we want to sell our fruit to our customers, we'll use Coles Audi. That's what pushed us into it. Okay, we started off with SEDEX a couple of years ago. The reason we had SEDEX back then was Coles was not accepting FairFarms when it first came out. And then more recently, once Coles came on board, we decided to switch to FairFarms. Reason being, we just feel it's more suitable to the Australian climate. It's more adapted to what Australian businesses are like. And I quite like FairFarms. External audits, they're not a bad thing. I do like the fact that I'd rather an external auditor pick up something on my farm that may not be quite up to scratch than Steve come knocking on the door with a big stick. So look, external audits are a good thing for a business, and it lifts our game. And anything that lifts the game of our industry, it's a benefit for us all. You've seen articles like that. You see plenty of articles like that for the blueberry industry in Coffs Harbour as well. Okay, it's not a good look for the industry. And it's something that we really do need to clean up, and 100%. Catherine was saying before about, we need to reimagine what farmers are doing. We need to change basically the dialogue around farming, and it's going to be one business at a time. Social licence was mentioned earlier. I think blueberries were, with the amount of things going on in the media here, they probably got very close to being cancelled from a social licence point of view. And it's really important that all the growers are doing the right thing. It only takes a very small, so we say they're the bad apples, but it doesn't take many in an industry to tarnish your reputation. Because at the end of the day, the guy's doing the right thing, that never makes it to the media. You won't see a picker who's getting paid $45 an hour going to the media, oh, guess what, such and such paid me $45 an hour. It's not going to happen. Okay, so, but the guys that are being underpaid, obviously they're going to hit the media. That's going to make the news. Since that's the only thing in the news, it makes it look like everybody's doing the same thing. So it's really important that we try to clear out those bad eggs, and I think government has a lot of a role to play there, in industry and government working together to clear out the bad eggs. Some frustrations, and this isn't just levelled at Fair Farms. Sorry to the auditors in the room. So there is a feeling amongst the growers that the audits are just there to create work for the auditors. Okay, so Rachel mentioned this earlier as well. We do need to make sure that we're getting tangible benefits for the growers that are, volunteering and coming up with this accreditation. There's a cost involved to doing these programs, and we need to make sure that as growers we're actually getting a benefit for it. If there's people out there doing the wrong thing that aren't accredited, if they're still getting paid the same for their produce as we are, well, that's got to stop. Okay, it needs to be something that's mandatory. And that's the only way you're going to get more and more growers on board, is hit them where it hurts, and that's the hip pocket. Okay. Do they even stop people that deliberately cheat the system, or just further burden those trying to do the right thing? So, audits are one thing, and Fair Farms is one part of it, but it's not going to be the final solution to clean up the industry. People doing the wrong thing are deliberately doing the wrong thing. It's very easy to show an auditor what you want to show them and continue doing the wrong thing. So this is part of the scheme, and I think it's definitely a step in the right direction, and it's really needed, but we need to make sure that we're going further than just the audits and making sure that we are clearing out those bad eggs. Inconsistency of audits, that's why I had that up there. If anybody here's been audited before, any growers in the room, you'll know that who audits you has such a big impact on the quality of that audit. It's huge. It can be anywhere, the standards can be anywhere from here to right up here. And that creates a bit of, I guess, it's not a level playing field amongst the audits either, from grower to grower. So I think, and that's not just Fair Farms, it can be Fair Farms, it can be Harps, it can be Fresh Care, anything that you get audited on. There's such a large range, even though they're on the same standards, there's such a large range of how you are audited, and I think that's something that the auditing bodies need to work towards in terms of harmonising that and getting them all on the same page. The high cost of audits. For big business, it's not a big deal to have $4,000 audits, but for the growers who only got 1 or 2 hectares, smaller guys starting out, if you've got Fresh Care, you've got Harps, you've got ethical audits, you've got ICA, it all adds up, and it can become a barrier to entry for smaller growers. So I think it's important that we try to keep those costs down as far as possible. Auditing system in Fair Farms itself, there's a couple of things that I would say it's a good start, but we can actually need to work towards. And for everybody out there, there's a points system. So when you get a corrective action, you're given points, and those points then add up at the end of the audit, which decide whether you're on a 12-monthly cycle for audits, a 24-monthly cycle, or a 36-monthly cycle. The number of points assigned for those corrective actions needs to be a bit more flexible for the auditor. At the moment, you have a standard, and if you have any finding against that standard, you automatically get assigned a certain number of points. Okay, so there's a standard in there about following the award, for instance. We got a corrective action on our first audit on that, and it was a simple, we had one employee who does time off in lieu, and we had an oversight, we didn't have a written agreement with the time off in lieu written down as a written agreement. We should have had that, it was an oversight, happy to fix it. But the number of points we got was exactly the same as somebody who was out there paying $12 cash in hand every day. The auditing system would give them exactly the same number of points. So I think there's scope there to improve on that. Overall though, like I said, I'm a huge supporter of ethical programs. We're a step in the right direction, and I think it was interesting to hear earlier on that there was a big improvement in the blueberry industry in this area with compliance. It's really good to hear stories like that. I think that's the first time I've heard that, and that was a really good thing to hear, actually, as a grower in this area. Challenges. You can't go away from the last 3 years without talking about all this. Growers have faced droughts, bushfires, floods, we've had hailstorms. We've been hammered for the last 2 years. I can't remember ever have been this hard to be a grower as it has been in the last 2 years. On top of that, we've had COVID, and then in this area, we've got growers who are absolutely struggling with varroa mite at the moment. Basically, their hives have been wiped out, they've been euthanised, they've got crops coming on, they've got flowers on, and there's nothing pollinating their crops. They've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars bringing those crops to where they are, and there's zero compensation for those growers. They've just been told to suck it up. So, not an easy thing to be told when you've invested pretty much your life in your business. General other challenges that we face as growers, we don't get to set the prices of our products. We're basically price takers. You know, it operates on supply and demand, and they vary week to week, and it's not uncommon at all. People don't realise that it is very common for us to be getting paid less than what we're paying our pickers to pick the fruit. And sometimes we don't know that we've received less until 2 weeks after we pick the fruit, when we get paid. So it's not an easy gig to be in, and blueberries in particular at the moment are starting to get to a point where the margins are wafer thin. Just this year, I know that we've pruned off probably 40-50% of our blocks before we even picked the berries off and just pruned it all off, because basically the harvest costs were too high. We've had really bad weather earlier on in the year, so yields are down. While the fruit quality is good, when yields are down, because they're hand-picked, instead of pickers being able to pick 14, 15, 16 kilos an hour, they're only able to pick 5 or 6 kilos an hour because there's less fruit on the bush. And well, we all know, you do the averages on your reward at 5, 6 kilos, the cost per kilo is obviously going up through the roof. It's more than we're getting paid. So you take the call and you just cut it off, prune it and hope for a better year next year. So it's not easy being a grower at the moment with all these challenges. High inflation. Everyone's seen these graphs, about 6%, 7%. Some of our inputs have gone up 500%. You look at fertilisers, some of the specific fertilisers and other things, like growers are feeling it at the moment in every aspect of their business. So it's a very tough time to be a horticulture grower at the moment. But I do see light at the end of the tunnel. I mean, these bad weather can't last forever. We'll probably be complaining about a drought next year. Labour hire firms, they're increasingly dominating the market. I think that's a challenge for horticulture, how we address that. Going back 5, 6 years, we probably had 100% of our employees directly employed by us. When they're directly employed, you know what you're paying them, you know if the pay slips you're giving, you've got 100% control over your own compliance. These days, there's no way you can get your fruit picked if you're just relying on directly employed. The employees do not want to work direct, they want to work through labour hire contractors. You do your due diligence. You know, you try to pick the best labour hire contractors, you check pay slips, you check everything, but at the end of the day, you haven't got the same level of control, I guess, as you do if they're directly employed. So I really do think that we need some sort of national licensing scheme for contractors. The very least in New South Wales, but national would be better. There's nothing worse than all the different rules you have around the states in this country. National would be great. And I think it's really important that government moves on that as a priority. Just anecdotally, I'm seeing personally a general trend towards more and more potential employees saying they will only work for cash and end payments. Okay, so whereas once upon a time you'd be turning away a small number of potential employees because that's all they want to work for, you're turning away more and more now, and you know that others are employing them. But you've got to ask yourself why there's so many people wanting to work for cash in hand. Are they double dipping on welfare payments? I don't know, because it's not the backpackers asking for cash in hand, it's the locals. So I think that's another system that needs to be looked at. Is there some sort of reform that needs to happen with our welfare system where there's more of an incentive for people to work when they're on welfare? Because it seems at the moment they don't want to work and lose benefits. Access to a skilled workforce. So this is the biggest thing. Obviously everybody knows that workforce is hard at the moment. And a skilled workforce is the single biggest factor in keeping us profitable, because we know how the award works. It's the average of how many they can pick. If you've got faster pickers generally across your workforce, your piece rates are going to come down. If you've got new unskilled workforce, your piece rates are going to be higher. So we do need access to a highly skilled workforce. It's the biggest impact on harvest costs. And there is some good news in that space. My next slide. Competing against growers who may not always follow rules and regulations. It's not a level playing field out there. How do we make it a level playing field? I don't know. But it's needed. Okay, when you're chopping off fruit because it's costing you too much to pick, but you know people down the road are still picking, because the pickers want to pick. They've got no work this year. They're saying, let us pick. Okay, so if you're chopping off hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of fruit and someone else isn't, it's pretty hard to swallow. So it's something that, I guess, needs to be worked on there. Not to be all negative, this is something that's worked for us. We've been trying the seasonal worker program, or the PALM scheme. Part of the Co-op Oz group that we're part of has been conducting a seasonal worker program. I've found it's really beneficial for our business. The best thing about it is it's reducing our reliance on other contractors who we don't have so much control over. We don't know what they're doing. It's giving us access to a returning workforce, because these guys, if you look after them and they make good money, you build relationships, they want to come back to your farm next year, the year after, the year after. You know, and they might be slow when they're fresh from overseas. They might be a slow worker, but they're only going to be slow for a month. They're on your farm. They're there to stay. And they're really good. They're really into their work. They love working. And they get quite fast. They're efficient. I think this is really a positive for the industry, if we can get more of these seasonal workers. They're not the golden bullet either, because there is a lot of, I guess, additional compliance with the PALM scheme. You've got to be able to provide them 30 hours a week as a minimum. Ideally, you want to be giving them a bit more. So what that means, though, is you need to give them a couple of months' work when you do bring them into the country. So they're not really suitable for all that surge labour you need for that 3 weeks where your season comes on, because you can't call over 50 people for 3 weeks and then say, okay, see you later, go home. But they're good to have for that smaller portion of your workforce all year round, and then use, backpackers and other things, anyone else locally for that surge in between. Thank you.
I might just ask the other speakers in the session to come up for a few questions. And for the audience to start thinking about your questions. We have a mic coming around the floor. Sam Tui has a mic. So if you do have a question, please raise a hand. And we'll try to do you in order of the hand being raised, one down the back there. Thank you, Sam Tui. Yep.
Thank you very much. Jeff Quinn is my name. My business is Many Busy Hands, and I stand up for backpackers because I think they've been treated appallingly right up till the time of the pandemic, when most of them went home. Now they're coming back at the rate of about 5,500 a month, and will continue to do so. Now they come in two cohorts. One is the 18 to 20-year-old who want to go to Party Central. The other are the 20 and up and down the coast, east coast or west coast, depending which side of the continent they're on. The other is a cohort that is about 23 onwards, and from some countries up to 35. Now, almost all of them have a university degree, and we're not harvesting it. And they've got a higher education, and they make excellent migrants, and some of them come here as migrants. Many of them meet their life partners here. I try to sell, and I've got a database, I built a database of 30,000 rural and regional businesses, and I've been outstanding, absolutely, it's just magnificent, the excellence of Australian agriculture. And Australian agriculture covers everything from A to Z. And you try and fill all that in, and Australian agriculture covers every bit of it. Now, I'd like you all to comment about what we can do to improve it. One of them would be, for example, increasing the 462 restrictions. For example, if they're coming from Argentina, fills up in 2 hours and it's limited to 500. If it's coming from the People's Republic of China, it's 4,000 and it fills up in 4 days. So I think we can do a lot to improve the way they travel, compared to they travel against the seasons rather than with the seasons, which tends to create all these labour problems. Anyway, that's enough from me. but I'd like you all to comment about it.
Oh, I'm regretting having the microphone first. I'm going to touch on this just from the people side of things, if that's all right, as opposed to the visa concept. And actually, I think Catherine's presentation was the most relevant in the sense of that the industry isn't sexy to work in. And so we have, as you say, these highly skilled people with university degrees coming over here, and it's seen as a means to an end. You know, they come over, they do picking, and that sort of, I guess, gives them the money that they need to have fun and travel. Yeah, and so I think if we're clearer around the career paths that exist within the industry, and we're creating that concept of actually this is a lifetime career. Hospitality faces the same thing. It's seen as this transient thing that you do while you're at uni. And so I think it is about the reputation and people understanding how great the career path can be in the agricultural, horticultural industry. The other thing I would say, just from the Labor perspective, is, you know, I know when my generation was younger, when we were at school, we got holiday jobs going and picking fruit or doing whatever it happened to be. I don't think that exists anymore. And so on a local level, we're not even tapping into that because kids don't see it as a good opportunity.
So is the question what we can do to increase the backpacker numbers or the treatment of backpackers on farms, or?
Generally utilise the whole thing well. I have a friend of mine who had a PhD, and the best job he got was working in a canteen and mining camp.
Yeah, I mean, well, I think probably the biggest thing we could do is extend their entitlements to how long they can stay, because as you pointed out, they can stay 3 years tops, and then they have to go home. The age limits are a factor. If they're over 35 or 30, as again you pointed out, they have to go.
France, Canada, Ireland.
But the point is that there's an age restriction, so if we could lift that, that would probably be a good thing. There are, again, as you pointed out, there are requirements around education. That's to make sure you get a relatively mobile cohort coming in, but maybe loosening up that a little bit. I know your point is that you're getting in people who have got skill sets that we should be drawing on, but there could be other skill sets that they don't learn in university. They could come over and use on the farms. And then you pointed out the caps is a big issue. And whenever I talk to the backpacker industry, I find out a sense of what's happening overseas. They always say it's the caps, which is the issue. And that's, there's uncapped countries. Those people aren't necessarily coming, but there are countries with caps, some of the smaller developing nations where they're capped and they just breach those caps really quickly and they can't come anymore. So, yeah, I guess that would be mine.
Yeah, I think the issue is the tenure, because even if someone is really great, fantastically highly skilled, great leader, great all these things, it's very disruptive if you were to build your business around that for 3 years and then that person leaves. It's really hard. So I think it's the length of tenure that's an issue. Obviously, as businesses ourselves, we need to make sure that we're creating career paths so that picking jobs evolve into leadership jobs, evolve into higher management. And I think that's what I touched on with the schools program, that obviously there's very real jobs on farm, but obviously you can't do that for 20 years as your tenure, or some people don't want to, so how do we evolve those jobs up? But I think generally, yeah, it's the length of time that gets people scared, because if you've got a fabulous person, to utilise all their skills and build your team around, it's like having a great full forward, but if he's only going to be there for 2 years and then your team's stuffed if he leaves, sorry for the football analogy, it's not great. So I think it's really that length that is probably the most problematic for both the business and for the individual.
Thanks, yeah. I don't know what I can add to that. Totally agree with the fact that the tenure is the biggest problem. Personally, our business is probably not at a scale yet where we're employing a lot of upper management like other big farms would be, so we're probably not the best to answer that question. But, for the few that we do employ, definitely, I'm looking at people, if I'm training somebody up, I want them to be there for at least 5 to 10 years as a minimum. 50 would be better.
I really enjoyed all of the talks then, but I'd particularly like to hear from Aman and Catherine about their views about what they might think Fair Farms can do more for them in terms of this. We've heard about the fact that there's not a level playing field. Is there something that the Fair Farms program can do for you to make this better?
From a Fair Farms point of view, I think we're on a good start. I mentioned a few minor things, which I think are just minor things that you'll fix up in version 2 and onwards, etc., etc. We're only on version 1 at the moment. More than Fair Farms, I think government has a bigger role to play here now. Industry can only do so much. We don't have any teeth at the end of the day. Industry can't find growers who are doing the wrong thing, so it's really up to government to actually, I guess, work alongside Fair Farms and GrowCom and the industry bodies, Berries Australia, to actually go out there, do some enforcement action, make an example of a couple of rogue operators, and hopefully pull the rest in line.
I think it's unfortunate when we talk about these real rogue ones too. These are criminal operations under any other name. So it's this extreme point. These people are never going to be in the room. I'm sure along with their cash that they're getting back from exploited workers, that they're probably selling drugs out the back, or this is hard crime that we would list for anything else. So to be grouped in the conversation of, do you sometimes have a worker that comes in who's missed an induction or something, all in the same conversation, is what I think is terrible. And that's what I think is so important for us to reclaim our voice and hold these conversations, because if we let other people speak on our behalf, they're always going to have their own agenda, and we have our own agenda. None of us are saints. So it's important that we're the voice of making sure that the outcomes that we reach, we need. No one's going to do this on our behalf. I think we've allowed that to happen for far too long. We've left the power with supermarkets, we've left the power with media, we've left that power with everyone else, and then gone, but that's not the true story. So I think that's why it's really important for us to be sitting at these tables telling the story, and not being the real truth being diluted by criminal organisations.
I think we have a question here.
So the question was, what can be done to make Fair Farms more available to growers? I mean, what I hear, and people are much better informed on this in the room, is that the audit's too expensive, and that's what keeps people away. So I just feel like there's something that could be done around that, and whether or not that's some sort of assistance from government, or joining together as a cooperative and getting bulk rates, that sort of thing. I don't know. Anyway, that's my thought.
I think we have a question here.
I'll just add, when you see, in the news from government agencies when they're doing compliance action, and they'll say we visited this many premises and we have this many that are non-compliant. I think the government agencies have a bit of a role to play here too, because they set us out to look like criminals as well. Sometimes the non-compliance, for instance, when NRA goes out with inspecting dams, somebody who may not have had a logbook is considered non-compliance, but then you might have 10 of those, and you'll have one person in there who might have just gone and dug an illegal dam and it's 3 times bigger than it should be. But they're not going to mention that they were minor non-compliances. They're going to have this big article out there saying, we visited 10 sites and 6 were non-compliant. So I think government needs to take that on board as well, and you need to differentiate between major and minor non-compliances. Because it's so easy to have minor non-compliances. Time off in loose slip that we had on our farm after 5 hours of him going through our records. And, at the end of the day, if that was a government agency, we'd be non-compliant and we'd be paying $2 under, cash in hand. And that's how we'd be portrayed in the media if that was a government audit. So, I just think that there needs to be that differentiation.
Any other questions?
Rachel, I think, has a follow-up, and then we'll go over here.
I just wanted to very quickly, do you think having a forward-facing brand that consumers could recognise that you guys are compliant, whereas Brent down the road isn't really pulling their weight? Do you think that would be a good thing?
100%. It gives us something, the growers, I guess, that are taking the time, putting the effort into getting these certifications, it gives us something that we can use, I guess, to market our product. And if we go out there and actually market it out there as well as, this is if you want to buy ethically sourced food, well, you look for this logo. There was big success years ago with the Australian made and that sort of thing, and I think we could do something similar and repeat it. Yeah.
I do to a certain extent, but I think it's a little bit simplified. The reality is Australian consumers don't really understand what goes into growing fresh produce, nor do they value it. So you know, it can then, having a forward-facing brand again can kind of be exploited unless we really have an educational story behind that. You know, a blueberry costs $4.99 and its cost is X per grams. Compare it to something else, it is still affordable. Like, what are we comparing it to? And why does it cost? Because there's been 10 hands that have touched it, a truck that's touched it. You know, you've had infrastructure sitting there for 10 years that you haven't had a return on investment with. These are the educational tools that then add power to that forward thing. But sticking something that says fair, people don't care. Like, they care, but then it just becomes another thing. Well, I don't think it really derives value unless there's really some education that really underpins that. And that's why I think it's so important that we start getting involved in education from the bottom up and start sitting around those kind of conversations, because how is the next consumer going to be any different to this consumer if we leave it to other people? How, you know, people need to understand what the costs are, the costs of growing it, but also the costs of not eating it, all of these things. We've got the best PR story ever if anyone used it properly. So that's my challenge to everyone, use it properly.
Further questions? Got time for one more.
Hi guys, Alice from Auscol again. You've talked about the inconsistency of audits. The success of the Fair Farms program obviously depends on consistent interpretation of its standard across CBs, across different auditors, regardless of which farm is being audited. What do you think we as CBs, and there are a number in this room, could be doing more to develop staff, to have our own internal governance so that there is more consistency?
It's a good question. So I'm not really up to date on how auditors are trained and how they go through that process, so it's hard to answer, but is there some sort of, when you're being trained, do the auditors actually sit with other auditors when they're going through audits? Are they seeing how other auditors are doing it? I don't know if you, because when I say they're inconsistent, it's widely inconsistent. It's not just a little bit. And I think it's not just the standards. Sometimes it can be the standard that is a bit vague. So I think the programs themselves have got to make sure that the standards are quite clear in what they're after. Some of them are quite open-ended. Like some of the work health and safety stuff can be interpreted as widely or as narrowly as an auditor deems appropriate. And then it's the auditors themselves. You'll get some auditors that will basically keep looking and keep digging deeper and deeper and deeper until they find a couple of cars, because it makes them look good that they've done their job. Yeah. So I know that doesn't quite answer your question, but there needs to be some sort of way of, the auditors getting together, or the standards themselves prescribing in more detail what they're after on each standard. Yeah.
Just got a lady here might want to make a comment, because I think it's an important kind of discussion that we're having just now. So,
hi, my name is Lata. I work for Integrity Compliance Solution. I'm an auditor too. So I looked at your slide and I totally agree, because there is no auditor qualification. It's not a special training. It's usually auditor becomes an auditor due to industry experience, the number of years. However, when you become an auditor or you join an audit body or certifying body, you go through a lot of training and achieve the codes for different product categories. I think it is a very important piece of the agenda now, because we have quite a lot of shortage of auditors in the field. And there is not even a single curriculum at the university level to talk about auditors or train auditors. So I think it is fairly important, and I'm also a technical reviewer as part of a certifying body. And you see that, the inconsistencies, because when you do technical review of the audit reports, it's quite different from one auditor to the other. So I think what we need to be, as a certifying body, needs to pull up the game and calibrate the auditors so that they all are actually working on the same level. I know auditors do different standards every day. It's when they go out to do audit, they probably are working on different standards, so it becomes quite difficult as well. The other comment I would like to make is also the standards itself. So you have your SMETA SADC standard, then you have your Woolies Coal standard. They're not actually aligned, so that's why a grower or people, the producers actually have to pay so much cost because you have to go through different audits. So I think it would be good if we could actually do an overview of all the standards and make a standard which probably is applicable to all levels in the produce sector. That probably will help the growers as well in terms of maintaining the costs as well. Thank you.
Fantastic contribution. Thank you for making that. That brings this session to a close, and in doing that, I just want to personally and on behalf of us all thank the 4 fantastic speakers we've had during this session. I think it's been another fantastic session, and I've personally taken a lot away from it. We've got a few gifts to present to you all, and with that, I was hoping you might be able to all join with me in giving them a round of applause.
Thank you.